Today we are learning history from 3, that is rise of African nationalism. And the first thing that we are going to learn is, first of all, define what is nationalism or African nationalism. So when you're talking about nationalism, we are saying of that desire for independence and self-determination. So the desire for independence and what you're referring to as self-determination. That is among the people or among a group of people in a given society or a nation. That feeling that one has, the national pride, that patriotism of belonging to a certain country, that is what you're referring to as nationalism. So now, during the pre-colonial period, or in other times, during the colonial era, Africans indeed were becoming determined due to discrimination that they were having during these times. And therefore they want to raise their African nationalism to be able to fight for independence or for their freedom. Because one, we are realizing that they are becoming determined, they are having what you're referring to as national pride, becoming patriots of their own country. Therefore, there must be those factors that lend to rise of their nationalism. But before then, it is good to understand and note that several resistance movements in Africa that we are seeing, maybe it can take you back in the first topic about colonial administration, actually the Scrabble invitation of Africa, whereby Europeans scrabbled for Africa, and then later, when they started now, administering African colonies. So we are saying these resistance movements that contributed to Africans rise the African nationalism, there were such movements like, for example, the Maji Maji rebellion, rebellion. We also having, this was found in Tanganyika, or in other terms, recent we call it Tanzania. We also had another revolt or movement that was known as the Chimurenga War in southern Rhodesia, in modern today known as Zimbabwe. We also had another movement or uprising that was known as the Nandi Uprising, that is in Kenya. Nandi Uprising. And all of these movements, they are spearheading or actually bringing upon rise of African nationalism, making Africans to raise their, their pride, so they can be able to fight, struggle, and get their independence or freedom. So after Second World War, all of this is the one that is being seen in Africa, trying to, like for example, after Second World War, we shall be seeing in the factors for the rise of African nationalism that there was return of the ex-soldiers who came with skills and experience. And this is going to spearhead or indeed bring or make Africans to raise the African nationalism. Therefore, this will take us to factors that led to African nationalism. Factors that contributed to the rise of African nationalism. We are going to start with the first one, whereby Africans were exploited by the colonial administration. So there is exploitation. Exploitation by the colonial government. By the colonial government. So you will find that Africans who are owners of their own land, they were thrown out of their lands, and these lands were taken by Europeans for settler farming. And then later you would find that these Africans would be exploited in a way that they would work in their own lands, with very low wages, and sometimes you would find they were even taken to reserves. Therefore, exploitation of Africans by the colonial government, by taking all their lands and throwing them out of their lands, this is making them to realize themselves and having pride on their own self, raising their African nationalism for them to be able to fight for their freedom, for their independence. Secondly, we're also going to look at the return of what you call the ex-servicemen. The ex-servicemen from World War II. So therefore, when these ex-servicemen returned after World War II, they had gained skills or tactics of fighting. And again, there was this belief that Europeans cannot be defeated. They now came to preach this to Africans, mobilizing them to fight for their independence, because they knew that Africans can also be able to fight these Europeans whom they thought they were, immortal. Therefore, this contributed so much towards the rise of African nationalism, because Africans were able to understand the use of and power and abilities to fight these Europeans. Then we can also look at the Western education. Western education. When it comes to Western education, this was provided by the missionaries, and you find that these exposed Africans to acquire skills, or what you call literacy and numeric skills on history of Europe and history of United States of America. So Africans were able to understand their own freedoms, their own rights as human beings, and therefore this land or made them to fight for their freedom, and therefore this spearheading or actually making Africans to raise their nationalism for the struggle for their independence. Maybe the fourth one, we can also look at another factor that is spearheading the African rise of, or in other terms, rise of African nationalism. There is what you call imposition of hard tax. There was also poll tax and what you call breast tax or breast tax. These taxes were imposed on Africans. One, the hard tax was imposed to all people who had houses or that is buildings. The other one is poll tax. This poll tax was introduced to all adult men, and the breast tax was introduced to all adult women. So we are going to continue from there when we meet again.